So thank you so much to everyone for joining us this evening, and special thanks to Eric Wargo. I'm absolutely delighted, Eric, that you're doing this session with us. We had a a chat after myself and Anthony Peake were supposed to be interviewing you for the Consciousness Hour show. Anthony is somewhat plagued by gremlins and the archons, and as I keep telling him, he's got to stop talking about it because he just manifests these things. Like it actually happened to him the other day as well. I mean, it's getting a bit of a joke now. So that conversation hasn't happened yet, but hopefully that will also happen in the future. But me and Eric kind of bonded over ancient dream culture a little bit, and I've read a chapter of his forthcoming book, very luckily for me. And there's a lot of kind of overlap and interest in dream culture and the potential for precognition through dreams as well. So that's something that Eric's going to be discussing today. So I am absolutely delighted that you're here with us, Eric. Thank you so much for taking part in the Virtual Dream Palace program. It's a real honor to host you, and I'll hand over to you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for inviting me to this event. This is awesome, and it sounds like an amazing experience for everybody. I wish I could be there in Athens in person to join you all. But yeah, it's always great to talk about this topic to people who appreciate the culture of dreams and dreaming. So I'll just leap right in. I've got a presentation, and then I'll hopefully we'll have 10 or 15 minutes at the end for questions. So I'll just go ahead, and I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Okay, I'm going to be talking about precognitive dreams today. Now, what are precognitive dreams? What is precognition? Let's start with, I'll start with a definition of precognition. It means literally knowing before, that is to say, seeing, knowing, or pre-sponding to events in the future. Now, there are a lot of vernacular terms that sort of are encompassed in this umbrella. You'll often hear the term premonition. It sort of typically means a forewarning of something usually bad that's going to happen. Prophecy is another term. It literally means saying before, but that is to say somehow uttering or writing something that's going to come true in the future. And presentiment, which means feeling before. Means somehow having a feeling that's connected to something that's about to happen. Now, all of the important thing here is this is all very distinguished from prediction. So we're not talking about prediction or predicting the future based on our inferences or extrapolating for prior trends. The idea here is being influenced by the future in some way that's impossible from our standard linear understanding of causality. I'm not going to talk about the science of precognition in this talk, but there's abundant scientific evidence for the existence of precognition that's been gathered over nearly a century now by parapsychologists. So it's not accepted in mainstream science yet, but there's abundant, meta-analyses of studies after study after study that support the existence of something like precognition. How does it manifest? It manifests in general intuition. It manifests in inexplicable emotions, those presentiments I talked about, neurotic symptoms, sudden flash visions in meditation or trance or daydreaming or hallucinations. Synchronicities. We're going to talk a little bit about synchronicity later. Inspiration in art or writing. This is actually the subject of my current research, and I've got a book coming out about precognition and its relation to creativity. Hypnagogic and hypnopompic states on the edge of sleep are very fertile for studying precognition. I'll mention that a little bit later too. And dreams. They're the most commonly noticed and reported examples of precognition in people's lives. The belief or expectation that some dreams relate to future events is universal in culture. Cultures throughout history and across the world all accept that dreams sometimes relate to future events. The sole exception is Western scientific culture since the Enlightenment, that just doesn't make a place for it. The concept of precognition per se is a modern understanding. It's typically in most cultures, dreams that foretell the future, they'll often be explained as coming from gods, spirits, the dead, and so on. But this kind of more mechanistic understanding of precognition as potentially a function of the brain or consciousness, that's a more modern Western understanding. And these are the most again, they're very common. Precognitive dreams are the most common type of, quote unquote, paranormal experience that is reported. There are as many as a quarter to, I've even seen higher percentages of up to half of people report having had dreams that they thought related to future events. So they're very, very common. I argue, this is one of the arguments in my book, Precognitive Dream Work and the Long Self, that they're probably actually experienced by everyone. We just don't tend to notice it. Okay, so I'm going to give you some examples just to kind of whet your appetite for what we're talking about. One of the most famous, it's become a very famous example just in the last couple decades, is from Samuel Clemens or Mark Twain. But this occurred in his life long before he was Mark Twain. He was working, I think he was in his early 20s, and he was working as an apprentice pilot on a Mississippi River steamboat. And he got a job for his younger brother, Henry, a very low paying job for his Henry on the same steamboat. And they were ashore. They were staying with their older sister in St. Louis when Samuel had a very vivid dream of seeing Henry laid out in a metal coffin or a metal burial case, dressed in a suit of his own clothes, Samuel's clothes, and with a bouquet of flowers on the chest. And the box was laid on two chairs. Well, shortly after this dream, they shipped out on the steamboat and headed south toward New Orleans. And along the way, Samuel got into a fight with the pilot, and the pilot made him stay ashore in New Orleans while the boat turned around and headed on its run back north. And meanwhile, he got terrible news that there was a boiler explosion on the boat that killed a lot of the people on the boat. So he hurried to Memphis, which is where the explosion had occurred. And he was able to be with his brother Henry on his last night of his life. Henry was terribly burned, and he died of an overdose of morphine. Well, the next morning, Samuel went into the room at the Memphis Exchange where all the bodies were laid out in boxes, and all the boxes were pine except for one, and it was a metal box, and Henry was laying in it, and he was wearing a suit of Samuel's clothes that Henry had borrowed without Samuel's knowledge. And while he was observing this scene that had been from his dream, a nurse came in and laid a bouquet of roses on his chest. So a very stunning example. But these kinds of examples, premonition, we typically call them premonitions of death of loved ones, are extremely common in the literature. But it's not all about death. I mean, premonitions are in the minority of precognitive dreams, actually. My favorite example of a not only a stunning precognitive dream, but one that is a really long-term precognitive dream spanning decades of a person's life, comes from the writer Vladimir Nabokov. When he was a young man, I think he was around 17, he was sort of happy-go-lucky young man, sort of from a rich family. And in 1916, his uncle Vasily died and left him a huge estate outside of St. Petersburg. And like, awesome. I mean, he was set for life. He was suddenly a rich man, okay, and set for life. But then a year later, the Russian Revolution happened and swept it all away. He and his family were sent into exile. They lost all their wealth and so on. But around this time, he had a dream that his uncle Vasily appeared to him and said, "I shall come back to you as Harry and Kuvirkin." Okay, and he thought these names were circus performers somehow, because Kuvirok means somersault in Russian. Anyway, so he emigrated to the US. Well, fast forward, I think 42 years. He was living in Ithaca, New York, and he was teaching English. And he suddenly got fantastic news. In fact, he read about it in the paper, that Harris and Kubrick Pictures, which was Stanley Kubrick's production company, had purchased the film rights to his novel Lolita for in what was at that point an enormous sum. And so for the first time since his youth, he was a rich man. And he remembered his dream that his benefactor would return to him as Harry and Kuvirkin. Kuvirkin in English would be Kubrick. Okay. So stunning long-term precognitive dream, spanning more than 4 decades in a person's life, but with that specificity that precognitive dreams have, that is just uncanny. I'll name a few other examples. Paul Callis is an astronomer at Berkeley. In 1995, he had a dream where he was shown a picture of a very unusual debris disk around a star that he was studying. Now his specialty was debris disks around stars, but this debris disk was very unique because it was very off-center, related to it wasn't just, the star wasn't right in the middle of the disk. It was very off-center in this disk. And he sketched it and he wrote this dream in his journal. Well, 9 years later, almost to the day, he discovered in a Hubble photograph a off-center debris disk that was just like the one in his dream, and it matched the drawing in his dream record exactly. And this was very significant because it was a significant discovery because it led to the discovery of an exoplanet around the star Fomalhaut, and because he predicted that there would be a star on the edge of the debris, a planet on the edge of the debris ring. And this planet became the first planet to be photographed in visible light, first exoplanet photographed in visible light. So it was a major career moment for Callis, and he dreamed about it almost exactly 9 years to the day beforehand. Another example that I love, David Mandel was a retired art history teacher or art teacher in London, who had a record of precognitive dreams. He was always dreaming about terror attacks and earthquakes, things like that, and plane crashes before they occurred. And he would paint them. Instead of keeping a dream journal, he made watercolor paintings of his dreams. And then because these were happening so often, he got in the habit of taking his watercolors to his local Barclays bank and having himself photographed under the calendar clock of the bank building to sort of establish a timestamp of these dreams, to sort of prove that he made these paintings before the events occurred. Well, on September 11th, 1996, he had a terrible dream about the Twin Towers in New York crashing into each other and collapsing, and it was a really horrifying dream. And he drew it and had himself photographed, as you can see in this photograph, then painted it in watercolor. And several months later, he had another dream about the same event, but this time planes were crashing into it. So, stunning precognitive dream, exactly 5 years to the day before 9/11. As I said before, premonitions of death and disaster are very much in the minority of precognitive dreams, but they're the most often noticed and reported. Um, uh, because these events stand out in our minds, we're more likely to notice having had a dream about something terrible, like a terror attack, or something like the Titanic sinking. You know, tons of people dreamed about the Titanic before it occurred. Okay, so how does precognition work? All right, people typically think of precognition as directly seeing or receiving information about some objective event out in reality. Um, and the term extrasensory perception, which is often used as a bucket for psychic phenomena, it encourages that idea that it's some sort of perception of objective reality. And this, I believe, is wrong, and I'll explain why. Wait a second. To understand precognition, really we need to go back to the great pioneer of the study of precognition, which is John William Dunn. He was an aeronautical engineer early in the last century. In fact, he was one of the first aeronautical engineers, like right around just after Kitty Hawk. He was designing airplanes in England. But he was also a dreamer. And he had all his life, he had dreams that matched future events. So for instance, his most famous one, this is while he was still a soldier fighting in the Boer War. He had a dream that 4,000 people were about to die on a French volcanic island. And the next mail delivery to his regiment brought a newspaper with a story about the eruption of Mont Pelée on the island of Martinique. And it said that 40,000 people were killed. However, he misread the headline as 4,000 when he read the story. Another example, he dreamed there was a test pilot that he knew, and he dreamed of this test pilot crashing and walking out of the crash and blaming his beastly engine. Okay, well, 2 days later, he read a bulletin of the death in a crash of this same test pilot. And now he later found out, and this is important, he later found out that the crash had nothing to do with the engine, that it was a lift wire on the wing that had snapped during flight. And Lieutenant B would have known that as he was plummeting to his death. So what this told what these examples and others like them told Dunn was that, this was not like a telepathic connection to Lieutenant B somehow, because again, Lieutenant B would have known the real cause of the crash, so he wouldn't have said that it was his engine. Discrepancies between actual events and the way he read about them or learned about them enabled him to determine the source of the dream information was his own future self. Precognitive dreams are not about future events and objective reality. They are about future experiences, our own future experiences, including learning experiences and reading experiences. And this is the most important principle in what I call precognitive dream work. They are essentially, precognition is a kind of memory in reverse. Okay. Here's a modern example that proves this point, brilliantly. This is a woman named Elizabeth Crone, who lives in Houston. Lovely woman. I've spoken to her many times. She had a near-death experience after being struck by lightning, of all things, in the parking lot of her synagogue in 1988. And after that, she has had repeated premonitory dreams about disasters. And many of them are air disasters. And sort of the way Mandel learned to have himself photographed, she emails herself these dreams when they occur, and that sort of creates its own natural date stamp on these dream accounts. So she, on January 15th, 2009, she dreams of an American jet somehow landing on the Hudson River, making an emergency landing on the Hudson River. Well, this was like 6 hours before the famous miracle on the Hudson, when Captain Chesley Sullenberger piloted his plane to a safe landing. Now, amazingly, she told her husband when she woke up from this dream that somehow the passengers were standing on the wings. Okay. Well, the famous photographs that went viral, like in the media and on the internet after this landing, showed the passengers standing on the wings of the plane. So she was dreaming these images, essentially. She was dreaming not about the landing itself. She was dreaming what she was going to see in the media. Another example, she dreams, of this vivid image of a propeller plane with one wing straight up, landing somewhere in Asia, and most people killed, but there's some survivors. I think it was a couple days later, this photograph went viral on the internet that was taken by a dash cam. So Dunn argued, he wrote this book called An Experiment with Time in 1927, which sort of sums up his lifetime of precognitive dreams and his theories of how they work. And he argued that we're all precognitive dreamers, and it's a normal, even nightly occurrence, possibly. And we mostly simply fail to notice it. Unless people go back to their dream records and look for correspondences to waking life, they're not going to remember their dreams, and they're not going to notice these connections to real life. And so this is his work was sort of an early piece of citizen science. I mean, he was trying to get readers to, hey, he said, this is what happens to me. Do this for yourself and see if this is, prove to yourself that this is true. Gather evidence of your own to support this idea. And so it was this was actually a very, very influential book on writers, especially writers of the time like T.S. Eliot, C.S. Lewis. They were big fans of Dunn's book. A lot of people don't know that J.R.R. Tolkien was heavily influenced by Dunn's book, and in fact, the sort of philosophy and worldview of the elven races in Tolkien was strongly influenced by his ideas about time based on his dreams. Vladimir Nabokov read Dunn's book in the early 60s and did his own experiment with time over the span of a month, recording his dreams on index cards and then comparing them to later events. And he got a number of precognitive dream hits. And in his case, they were like TV shows. He was like a big watcher of TV, and he would have dreams that matched some weird scene in a TV show a few days later. So Dunn's framework, or his sort of theory of precognition, is a really interesting alternative way of looking at synchronicity. One of the most famous precognitive dreams in the literature, in fact, is not even thought of as such because it's been framed as synchronicity, but it's really a Dunn dream, and that comes from Carl Jung's book Synchronicity. And I'm sure a lot of you listening right now have encountered this anecdote at some point in your reading, because it's very, very popular. This story, it's probably one of the most popular things Jung ever wrote, in fact, is this case of this young woman patient who is very hyper rational and very inaccessible to anything magical or whatever, or mystical, who brought him a dream in her session that she had the night before, of somebody giving her a golden, costly piece of jewelry in the shape of a scarab beetle, an Egyptian scarab. Okay, and just as she's telling him this dream, he hears a tapping on the window behind him, and he turns around, and there's what's called a rose chafer. It's sort of the local Swiss equivalent of the Egyptian dung beetle, and he opened his window, cupped it in his hand and handed it to her and said, "Here's your scarab." And it was a sort of shamanic moment in her therapy, which sort of opened her to magic and so on. The simplest explanation for this, though, is not archetypes aligning and so on, as Jung preferred to see it. It was simply a Dunn dream. His patient had a precognitive dream about a significant, meaningful moment in her therapy session the next day. It happens all the time in therapy, by the way. Of someone handing her a scarab beetle, and then the explanation of its significance in Egyptian religion. Of course, the beetle took the form of an Egyptian scarab in her dream. Wait, sorry. What confuses people about cases like this is there's a causally circular aspect to it. Jung only noticed the beetle and opened his window and gave it to Maggie because she had been telling him her dream about being given a beetle. So there's like a causal circularity to it. Okay. Now, a lot of people think, isn't that a paradox? Okay. Isn't that, how can that be? No, it's not a paradox. It's a tautology, which is actually the opposite, actually the opposite of a paradox. And causal loops like that would have to be a necessary feature of any universe in which information in any form travels backwards in time, for instance, in dreams. And this is, the ancients kind of got this. The ancients who thought a lot about divination and prophecy and so on, this idea was understood, I believe. I mean, it's central to for instance, to the myth of Oedipus, that he fulfilled the prophecies about him precisely by trying to evade them. Self-fulfilling prophecy is core to that myth, and it comes up in a lot of old stories. Shakespeare's Macbeth is another example. So what is a time loop? This is a term I use a lot. I'm really referring to causal loops. I'm not referring to the space-time itself somehow curling back on itself, but I'm talking about a causally circular situation where an effect in the future, like some rewarding or troubling experience, has an effect in the past. I argue that dreams show this process, that strong emotion kind of carries experiences backward in time in our mind and brain to manifest as a dream or a vision or artistic inspiration or whatever. But then our freely willed actions lead to that future in which we have that experience. So there's that causally looping dimension to it. So how do you do this yourself? Take the J.W. Dunn challenge, and let's talk a little bit about how you work with this in your life. It's easy. First of all, write all your dreams down. And I'm sure that many of you do this anyway, but it can't be reinforced enough that you can't work with dreams very well without keeping dream records. And in this case, try and keep as detailed a dream record and try to record in as much detail all your dreams as you can, because one of the myths about dream precognition is that only dreams that feel numinous or special are precognitive. Not true. Even the most mundane or boring, nothing seeming dream can often turn out to have a striking precognitive component to it. So write your dreams down. Obviously, do it as soon as you can upon waking, to prevent you from losing it over as the day progresses. But that's the most important. Reassociate. Now, this is something that, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but this is something that J.W. Dunn did not do. But this is important, and I'll explain why in just a bit. Take every element in your dream, every character, every weird thing that you notice, and just ask, what is the first thing that comes to mind for this? What's the first thing that reminds me of? And write down those associations. Okay, you're not, now, unlike in Freudian dream interpretation, you're not trying to decode the dream when you're doing this. You're just trying to get those associations down because, and I'll explain why in a minute, but it's important and it helps you capture a lot of precognitive dreams that you would otherwise miss. Write down these associations with your dream record and then set your dream record aside. Don't even think about your dreams, okay, for the rest of the day. Okay, lastly, revisit Now, this is the most important thing, and this is what defines precognitive dream work. Okay, revisit your recent dream records at the end of each day, and no one has time to go back through their entire dream journal every day, but at least go back through the last few nights of dreams and just reflect on any common themes or similarities to events happening in that time frame. Both the manifest content of your dream and your associations to the dream. And people who do this, I'm not the first person to recommend this practice. Again, J.W. Dunn, essentially his dream work recommendation was steps 1 and 3. Just write all your dreams down and then revisit them. But people who practice this find that a significant percentage of their dreams turn out to have precognitive content. I mean, the figure of a quarter is I think a pretty. It sounds amazing, but in my own practice, I've found that a fifth to a quarter of my dreams turn out to be precognitive, and other people who've practiced this find the same thing. So again, why a free associate? What's the reason for that part? Most precognitive dreams are not literal pre-presentations of future experiences. Okay, there are exceptions, but they're mostly distorted, and they use personal associations and symbols and things like puns and other tropes that are used by memory. If this is an aside I don't have time to talk about, but if you've ever practiced or learned about the art of memory, the ancient art of memory, the ancient art of memory is essentially how the brain makes memories. It's using associations, and so when you're tapped into your dream language, you're really tapping into the way your brain encodes information. And so that's why most precognitive dreams are not literal, and it's those associations that are often the link to the future experience. So I'm going to give you an example. This is just one example from my own dream journal. I woke from a dream. It was a very, very brief dream that was just a sequence of black and white images. It was distinctly black and white. It felt like an old kind of new wave cinema feel to it. And it was a sailboat on the water. It was a couple sort of having a tense situation on the water, and there was this car at an intersection in the rain. Anyway, I woke up. I wrote down the images, but I took the time to think, well, what does this remind me of? And it reminded me of a film I had seen like years and years ago at a Slavic film festival called Knife in the Water and this was an early Roman Polanski film. Anyway, so I wrote that down. All right, a couple hours later at work, I wanted to go to the kitchen to get my knife to peel my apple at work, and I go in there, and what do I find but the sink completely backed up, and there was one object in the bottom of the dirty water, and it was the knife that I was looking for. Okay, so this is why you need to write those associations down. If I had not bothered to free associate on my dream, I wouldn't have noticed that link, because the link was to the association, knife in the water. And so how to dream, what is it that determines a dream? Why do you have a certain dream on a certain night about a certain future experience? I think that there are a number of principles that are operative. One of which is thematic resonance. I think that it's a kind of priming, really, that you may have a waking experience during the day that in some way resembles some future event, and your brain that night makes connection between those two events. So here's another example from my dream journal. I was writing part of my book at night about David Lynch's movie Eraserhead, and I was sort of thinking a lot about David Lynch and this movie. And that night I had a hypnagogic vision that I wrote down in my journal here of a robot head, and it had like a single eye, and it had antennas sticking out. And it was a flash vision, that seemed, worth writing down. Anyway, I drew it, wrote it down, robot with the words robot head. And a couple of days later, I was on a trip to my mom's house in Colorado, and I got out this box of Legos from my childhood that I had not looked at in decades, 3 or 4 decades, and I dumped out this box of Legos. I thought my kids would like playing with the Legos, but at the very bottom of this box of Legos, what do I find but this old robot eraser from my childhood that was essentially exactly the thing that I'd seen in my dream. The same head with the antennas sticking out the sides and a single eye, and it was an eraser. And so my dream had created a little like short circuit, or that dream image had created a short circuit between what I was then preoccupied with, which was eraser head, and this refinding this kind of special toy from my childhood. It was a kind of nice moment to find this little toy that I'd completely forgotten about, which was a robot eraser. And so I had a vision of a robot head. Calendrical resonance is another really important determiner of when we have precognitive dreams and about what. Dreams very often, and this is one of the most amazing things when you keep a long enough dream journal, that you're able to detect this in your dreams. But dreams very often target highly salient experiences that are exactly a year or multiple years ahead in time. The examples I gave of David Mandel's 9/11 dream that's one example. Paul Callis's dream that, again, it'll be either exactly to the day, or I find in my case within 1 or 2 days on either side of it. But other people I've worked with find that it's always exact. I think it depends on how calendrically oriented you are in your own life and your own cognition. But this is a really important thing. I think that the same way that anniversaries remind us of significant events in our past, in the way you might feel sad on a certain day and then wonder why, and then you look at a calendar and you realize, oh, this is the day that my mom died, or whatever. I think the same thing is happening in reverse. Again, precognition is a form of memory. It's just memory for our future. And so anniversaries of events remind us of those events in the past. They pre-mind us of those events. Dreams, it's interesting. The dreams don't seem to focus on single events so much, or single experiences so much, as on a sort of a window of time. And so if you have multiple kind of mildly interesting things happening within the same maybe couple hours of waking life, if you had a precognitive, if you look at and you find that there was a precognitive component to one of those experiences, you may find that the dream was relating to those other experiences as well, even if they were unrelated. So there's a way in which dreams seem to bundle events in time in our memory, or in our prememory, as I like to call it. And a dream may relate to multiple experiences during that time window. Dramatization. Now, this is really important. Dreams make things this is important for any kind of dream work, obviously. I mean, dreams make things as dramatic as possible. And that's actually an art of memory principle, is making things dramatic. And I think that facilitates our memory for events. But they, for instance, you may have a precognitive dream that's really just about something, pretty trivial, something on the internet, or it's a picture or a video or something like that. If you have a precognitive dream about it, you'll generally be in the thick of the action, and it'll be, a dramatic scene. The drama quotient, I like to say that the drama quotient in a dream is often wildly out of proportion to the importance or significance of the event that you're precognizing. Most precognitive dreams, when you actually do precognitive dream work, are going to be about pretty, they're not monumental events. I mean, things like a sink backed up at work, or like in this case, I had a vivid lucid dream about fighting or preventing these two animals here from fighting each other. And then that evening, I got a magazine in the mail, and I opened it up, and there was that picture. So it was like, very stunningly precognitive of this picture in a magazine. But it was just a picture in a magazine. But in my dream, I had been actually like attempting to keep them apart. They were about to fight and so on. And there were other significant elements to that dream too. I talk about it a bit in my book. Personification is another important principle. And here again, I believe this, even if you're not doing precognitive dream work, this is an important principle that actually Carl Jung originally wrote about, that your dreams present abstractions, objects, animals. They'll put them in human form. And being in human form in our imagination and in our dreams enables us to interact with them in a sort of human-like way. And I think that on some level, we imagine our interactions even our physical interactions with our environment. We imagine them as people. We imagine objects as people. We imagine animals as people. Dreams often, have a precognitive dream about an animal. Very common to have precognitive dreams about animal encounters, but sometimes those animals will appear in dreams in sort of a human-like form. Time gimmicks, elements in dreams that involve anachronism in some way, like time travel, for instance, are often turn out to be signals that the dream is going to turn out to have been precognitive. And one interesting aspect of this is that dreams, or that movies and TV shows and books about things related to precognition or time travel are like magnets for precognition. I and precogs I work with are constantly having precognitive dreams about, movies like Arrival or the German TV series Dark, which is about time travel. And actually some of you may have had a dream about this presentation last night, because stuff that's about precognition somehow magnetizes the precognitive brain. I'll just talk about a couple of other briefly sort of principles of precognitive dream work. Emotional salience is important. Dreams typically focus on emotional upheavals. No, they can be minor upheavals, but rewards and surprising and interesting experiences, including learning experiences like in the media. But reward is often mixed with other emotions. I find that I most often precognize experiences where there's kind of a double valence. There's a little bit reward, but there's a little bit of feeling chagrined or humbled, or boy, that was close call. If there's a little bit of a double aspect to an experience, that's the kind of thing that somehow the precognitive mind keys in on. And I think this is important for studying premonitions, by the way. Some version of the thought, but I survived, I think is the target of many disaster premonitions. I think these dreams are really about survivor's guilt, actually. But again, most precognitive dreams are about relatively mundane experiences, not events like disasters, deaths, life-altering discoveries, lottery numbers and stuff like that. So in that case, what's the point? Well, it's mind-blowing. I consider precognitive dream work to be a gnosis. It is utterly mind-blowing to have a dream that then plays out in reality later, because it defies all of our assumptions about the mind, about time, about causality. And when you start to have these experiences regularly, which you will if you like actually do the steps that I talked about, it is just a stunning, life-altering thing. It awakens you to the fact that we are all long selves. Our future already exists. and it's already there and it's already speaking to us. We're already responding to our future. By the same token, it means our past still exists too. We exist as a four-dimensional creature, not a three-dimensional creature as we generally think of ourselves. If the future is influencing me, right now, which precognition means, it means that me right now is influencing me in the past, which is a mind-blowing thought. And it just vastly enlarges your sense of yourself and of other selves, that we're all long selves. So what are you waiting for? Keep a dream journal. Go back to your dream records. These are my books, Precognitive Dream Work and the Long Self, and Time Loops. And I've got as Sarah mentioned, I've got a forthcoming book that'll be coming out next year on precognition and creativity, which probably will be called From Nowhere. Okay, so I am ready to take questions.
You already know what they are, right?
What was that? Well, I already know what the questions are, and
Well, you had your answers. Did you get that lamp on your bedside table from the medieval fair as well?
I did. It's the same. It's the same. Yeah, the same person who made my mug. Yeah.
Great. Can I tell you about a time loop dream that I had?
Yeah.
In June, I was at the Paris Center for Consciousness Science, I think it's called, I'm not sure, in Tuscany in Italy. Actually, Eric, you should go there. You'd love it. And I made friends with Mary Pearson. And me and Mary Pearson were talking about her daughter, who was around the same age as me, I think. And her name was Deborah, and she's a filmmaker, and she lives in England. And we were chatting a bit about her, but not that much about any of her films or anything like that. And then that night I had a dream that I was with my best friend from school who was called Deborah. And in the dream, I was like, I've dreamt about Deborah because Mary's daughter was called Deborah. And in the dream, she was getting married. And there was a weird thing where she was getting married on the Isle of Wight. And for some reason, I was saying, I can't possibly afford to come to the Isle of Wight to your wedding. And my friend Deborah was telling me, don't worry, I'll pay for you to go to the Isle of Wight. And in the morning, I told Mary, and I was like, oh, guess what? I dreamt about my best friend called Deborah. And I know I dreamt about her because your daughter's called Deborah. And I wasn't going to mention the detail of getting married in the Isle of Wight, but I did. And she went, that's so weird because my daughter, Deborah, who's a filmmaker, made a film about a woman who got married and it was filmed on the Isle of Wight. So I was like, the Isle of Wight really did it for me. I mean, as long as you can incorporate the Isle of Wight into a precognitive dream, I think, there's evidence enough there because no one dreams about the Isle of Wight unless it's, really meaningful. Actually, I've just been invited to the Isle of Wight today, weirdly enough.
Very good. That's awesome. That's a great story. Yep. Yeah, that's the way it works.
Question. I saw that you had your hand up, Emma.
I was actually clapping because I really enjoyed it, but I also have something to say, so why not? Yeah, it was very interesting when you spoke about survivor's guilt, because my father, who was not woo-woo at all, used to dream of people he knew dying. He lived a pretty rough wild life. He was a biker. But he would dream like the exact places, like even a particular bend in a road they all knew or whatever, and all different types of deaths. And it used to really freak him the hell out. And he had survivor's guilt, like something he would often speak to me about is that, so many people he knew died and he just didn't understand why he hadn't, because he was also living a wild life, and kind of felt like he deserved it more than them.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
I'm interested in this. Did he feel guilty about the fact that he had those dreams? Did it worry him? Why am I did that trouble him, that part of it?
Yeah, it did, because he didn't know what to do about them. Because this is he was hanging out with bikers, they're not woo-woo people. So, there was one woman, for example, his ex-wife, and he rang her and was like, are you okay? Because I just dreamed you were going to die. And she pretty much abused him for being an idiot and what are you talking about, you mongrel Australian? So, I think he was just haunted by them. Right. He was really haunted and he didn't know what to do about it. you know, because no one would believe him. And I think he, yeah, thought there was just something, I guess he felt a bit ashamed of them, I guess. So he didn't want to talk about them to people because he I think feared the judgment.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, they cause real mixed feelings because a lot of people, the first thought they have is, oh, well, if I can do this, if I can dream about, I should be able to warn them, or I should be able to,
Exactly. Yeah. He
you know,
tried
and
the first few times and that didn't go well. And then he was
right,
just like, everyone just thinks I'm crazy.
right,
So
yeah,
I just won't talk about it anymore. And he told very few people. I'm one of the only people he told, but it haunted him his whole life. And I think it really fed into the survivor's guilt because then it was like, well, and now I know these things are going to happen. And once again,
right,
like, you know, I can't do
right,
anything. I'm not doing anything.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really interesting. That's really
Yeah.
interesting.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
You were talking about how, you know, our future selves influence, you know, our present selves or our
Mhm.
past selves. Do you think it works the other way as well? So can our past selves influence our future selves?
Well, sure. That's what memory is. You know, that's what memory and learning are.
Yeah, that's a good
So
point.
what we're talking about is just the same thing going in the opposite direction.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So it's messaging through memory
yeah,
rather than, yeah, okay. Makes sense. All right, thanks.
sure.
It was great.
Thanks.
Michael, you're next in line. Would you like to ask your question?
Sure. Hello, Dr. Wargo.
Hi.
Thank you. Your first book, Time Loops, was very influential for me, so thank you for that. The part that really caught my attention in this talk was when you mentioned the time travel element of dreams being incorporated into the prescient dreams. Do you have is that a part of your new book maybe, or is there some resources where I could read more about that?
No, this is something that I've just discussed. I talk
Well,
about it a
that's
little bit in my book, Precognitive Dream Work and the Long Self. That I've noticed that my dreams that turn out to be precognitive, and that I notice as the event is happening that I had a dream about this. Um, Often have some kind of little element in there relating to time travel. Often it'll be some element that associates to some movie about time travel or something like that. Uh, and I believe that the dream is essentially encoding. Remember, I said the dreams kind of bundle events together. Well, one of the things it's bundling in that case, it's bundling that realization that you had a precognitive dream about something, and it's using like something like time travel or some anachronism to encode that idea into your dream. And so it's very. I have a chapter about this in my precognitive dream work book. In fact, it involves those prehistoric animals that I talked about. That dream, there was a time travel element to that dream, and it was like mind blowing to like sit on my couch in front of this magazine that I just got in the mail, and then open my dream journal and see that. And so I believe the dream, that time travel element in the dream, was encoding that moment of opening my dream journal. And like, so there was this fractal geometric aspect to it that's like really like profound and amazing to experience. So that's what I'm referring to.
Thank you. Just a quick follow up. Do you think maybe by virtue of thinking so much about this subject, you're opening up some sort of, it's more likely to occur to you. You're more likely to dream about time travel. That makes perfect sense. But then B, you are perhaps more likely to have a prescient dream.
So that I've been asked this before, and I there's no way of knowing. My hunch, I have to believe that, that if the brain can reach into its future, this must have a basic, ultimately a survival rationale. It's got to be basic to dreaming. And so I say this in my most recent book that, I would never be able to prove this, and it's an unfalsifiable hypothesis. But my hypothesis is that all dreams contain precognitive material, and we just don't notice it. and because this has to be, basic kind of to our survival. Nature can do it at all. It's going to do it all the time. And so my belief is that, yeah, okay, someone who's attuned to this, certainly they're going to be noticing more instances of it. So I notice more precognitive dreams than most people do. But I think we can all learn to notice those dreams if we just do the work. And so I think it's a question of noticing precognition rather than actually experiencing precognition. But that, again, I can't prove that.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. I appreciate that. Yep.
Thank you, Michael. Mary?
Yep. First, thanks again, Sarah. Just fantastic stuff here. And Eric, amazing. One of the things I just want to, there's two things I want to comment on. The first, I love the way that you give these different examples of what precognition might look like. I had a dream in 2015 of looking at these like ceramic plates on a wall. And so I drew it in my journal. It was like, this is the dopiest dream, but I wrote it down, and it was, like 6 plates across, 5 plates down. So there are 30 in my dream. And then in January of 2016, I'm looking for a book that's going to help me with creativity. And I come across this book and I open up to page like 130, and there is the picture of these circles. It's a specific kind of a game for creativity. And I just showed the two of them to my husband. I said, see, these precognitive dreams don't always look like these full-blown, movie things that everybody talks about. And so I started using the idea of precognition, lucid dreaming, all these other dream types as being on a spectrum. And for me, the point is, once we prove to ourselves the tiny little things that are showing up, we sort of are more open, and maybe then the bigger precognitive dream might come in. But the other thing I was going to say is, too, I'll have friends say to me, but I watched that on TV last night, and that's why I dreamt of it, or I ran into so-and-so, at the supermarket. And I said to him, instead of thinking about it that way, think about it as your dream self needed a moment to have a dream key unlock something in you, and have that be just a new perspective. Because I just have found that if we have new perspectives, then we step onto the spectrum.
Right.
Just a thought.
Yeah, totally.
Thank you,
That's
Mary.
a great example. I like that dream.
Gabriella?
I also would like to thank you for very interesting and intriguing presentation. And I also have a story to share in reaction to Emma. I had a dream this year in which I attended a funeral of my friend. And in the dream, it was me and the group of friends attending the funeral and standing there in complete disbelief, like, how could this happen to such a young person, and stuff like that. And 3 months later, I had a meeting with this group of friends, including my friends who died in the dream. And he read us a poem that he wrote about his death. And like, we were also quite, I don't know, not shocked, but very surprised that he was reading us a poem, because we didn't know that he's a writer or poet or anything. So yeah, I mean, I immediately thought of the dream, that I had. So
interesting. That's a great example of why I always tell people, they'll say, well, I had this, dream about, someone dying, and I'm afraid it's going to happen. And I always tell them, it's like these things, precognitive dreams come true in ways that you can't expect. And they're usually not literal. I mean, obviously dream premonitions happen as, but most times you have a dream like that, if it comes true, it's going to come true in a very ironic way, or a way that you could never have anticipated. And that's a beautiful example of that principle. Yeah.
I also, at first I was like, okay, should I tell him? Should I not tell him? And then I was like, no, I don't want to freak him out. So I just kept on checking on him, like, you know, to see if he's online, you know. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you. I love that example. I love that.
Thank you, Gabriella. We've got a trio of Michaels, I think, coming up next. First, Michael.
Hello. I don't know if you can hear me, but...
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, that's great. Well, first, I want to thank you for the event. And yeah, this is something that's really close to my heart. And it's been for a while. But yeah, the thing that came to my mind was that, you know, I had some years ago, I had this dream. It was like about the song Alive from Pearl Jam. And I dreamt that it was like the anniversary of the song. And I just heard it like a few times when I was young, so I never really listened to the band or anything. But of course, after waking up, I had to check, and it was like a few days before that, it was like the 25 years anniversary of that song when it was released. And I didn't know, and I don't follow any media or anything, and you know, I hadn't been in touch with anyone who could have possibly told me that. So, but it was a bit like a precognitive, because of the dream, I had to check it up, and it turned out true. But
that's that's a time loop. That's another one of these time looping things, because you would not have, as you said, you would not have checked and looked up that, you know, that information had you not had the dream. So the dream is, that's beautiful.
Yeah, so
thanks.
Thank you. Pascal, Michael.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you, Eric. I'm a present researcher researching similar stuff to this, but kind of looking at near-death experiences at University of Greenwich, London. But I sort of started on a field study, a particular study using psychedelics to look at precognition, to see if that could be conducive to precognition. So there's that, and then I'm also interested in near-death experiences, and there's precognitive events that happen during that as well. And like you said with Elizabeth Crone, it can like trigger precognitive dreams and capacities and stuff like that. So the psychedelic and near-death thing, I'd be very interested for you to maybe comment on. But I do have something, like a particular example of something that happened to me and my dad. So my dad was actually a precog dreamer himself. Like, he would talk about it all the time. He'd just always discuss them with me. Happened multiple times, very, very, very many times actually. But he passed away a couple of years ago, and I remembered that. So essentially, exactly 3 months prior to him passing away, almost to the day, he messaged me and he said, "Last night I dreamt of a pure white light in the heavens. It wasn't daylight. This morning I read and he read it in a book. I think it was called The Experience of God. I think it was called that. So he wrote, this morning I read, one might imagine God's infinite actuality as a pure white light, with like a bajillion exclamation marks." So it's kind of interesting that he was a precog dreamer, and then he's relating one of these things to me of something that then happened to him the day afterward. But I'm wondering if it was more than just a precog effect of what he read the next day, and that was he potentially having some glimpse into his own death experience that was just going to happen some months later, because obviously the light is a classical feature of the near-death experience, and you have in like Buddhist tradition, and it's a cross-cultural phenomenon of it being light associated with death, and the Dharmakaya of Tibetan Buddhism, and so so there's that one element of the question of like, is it even feasible to precognize your own death, given that if you're a long body, that's when that long body ends, at least in this like manifestation or whatever. So there's that question, but also there's the interesting thing that there is the idea of sleep yoga, for instance, within the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, that in these deep wave, slow wave, like deep sleep, you can train yourself, like with dream yoga, but in these like deeper depths, to get to that state of like the void, which can be like this luminous void kind of thing. So yeah, just really would be interested in your comments and feelings on that.
Yeah, as far as what you said, you'd use the term long body. I like that term as well. Well, I think when people when they have precognitive dreams about their own death or other precognitive experiences that seem to relate to their own death, they're dreaming about dying. They're not dreaming about death as such. I think they're dreaming about the experience of dying or being close to death, and so that would explain that. And so, yeah, I think certainly, I think that yeah, he was dreaming about something the next day, but I think there was a larger crime essentially ahead in his future that may have sort of constellated that dream when it occurred. Seems reasonable. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you very, very much.
Sure.
Is that the other Michael there as well? The mysterious M?
It's Mar, but
Oh.
hello.
Hello.
So I think I had my first precognitive dream experience today. I thought I'd share and see if anyone agrees. So a couple of, maybe 1 or 2 weeks ago, I had a dream where I was in a new town, and it was a relatively hilly place. And at one point I was walking downhill and it was an easy pace. And then I decided to turn around. And when I turned around, it turned into almost a mountain climbing experience. And so today I was starting a new job and I had to take a little detour into a little wood. And I came to a fork in the wood and I didn't know which one to take. Took the path on the right, and it turned out to be the wrong one. But as I went down this one, I came to a stream, and there was this grey heron in it. And being excited to see the heron, I decided to go very slowly so as not to startle it. And as soon as I passed it, it started walking backwards. it was walking forwards when I was trying to pass it, and then it went backwards. Then once a couple of seconds later, I realized I was on the wrong path, and I had to climb up to get to the original path. And once I started climbing, I started getting this memory of this dream again, and it was a really tough climb. It was really wet, and it turned into this mountain climbing experience. Also, a couple of months ago, I read the story. Has anyone read Garden of Forking Paths by Borges? That's a very potent story about could be said to be precognitive dreams as well. But basically, I was also holding a garden fork as I was doing this little walk. So
yeah, that's how it works, and it's often there are a lot of precognitive dreams that they're so they're not exactly the situation, but they're very similar. And the fact that you remembered the dream when you had the experience, I would say, yeah, that this was I would certainly count that as a precognitive dream.
It's interesting what you brought up there with regards to the garden fork as well. And Eric and I have discussed the kind of ancient just total acceptance that the future is revealed in dreams. It's across the board in every single ancient dream culture that the purpose of dreaming is to work out the future and to work out the truth. And the role of puns, wordplay, and homophones are ever present in ancient Near Eastern, ancient Egyptian dream interpretation as well. And that's something that I think is underestimated, especially when you look at how many associations you can make with any given word and any given item, that you then can imbue meaning with them depending upon, you know, your own personal take on what things are important to you. And we all have like a personal mythology that does that naturally. We cultivate that throughout our lifetime so that certain things are meaningful to us that may not necessarily be meaningful to another person. But I think the wordplay is something to take real notice of when you do write down your own dreams. So when you're dream journaling, as well as making those associations, look at the kind of structure of words and break them down, because sometimes they're homophones, so they are sound-alike words that may be revealing something about what it is that the dream is trying to reveal to you. But I loved, Pascal brought something up earlier in the chats that was about this idea of dramatizing things. And I find this an interesting idea because it's something that I have experience of with regards to, well, what I would call it is attention. Like the more you give something attention in the dream, the more potency it seems to have. So for example, people often talk about in sleep paralysis situations where they're being overwhelmed by some demonic force or some being pressing down on their chest. The more you're scared of something, the sort of more powerful that thing becomes, and then the more oppressive it can become on you. And similarly, I noticed stuff like you mentioned a heron. And when I see birds, because I was in the Young Ornithologist Club when I was a kid, so I'm really into birds. And because I want to see them, and I give them my attention in dreams, they become bigger than they would be in ordinary life. So I see insects and birds as being like toddler size, because what I'm giving my attention to in the dream attenuates the scale of them as well. And I think scale and perception feeds very sort of easily into time perception as well. And we've had Daniel Oldis on the Virtual Dream Palace program previously, and he's doing all these experiments in dream recording. And one of his big areas of research is in time perception in dreams. And one thing, because we've discussed this subject privately, that I notice in lucid dreams is that basically what he's noticed in his research is that things kind of appear to be happening in slow motion in dreams, even though you would track them as happening according to normal time inside of the dream. But one thing you notice in lucid dreams, and I think it's because you have this expanded awareness of experiencing time from multiple perspectives simultaneously, if you see what I mean. So time is sort of expanded and becomes multidimensional, and you're not necessarily experiencing time from like a single perspective according to a linear trajectory through an imaginal landscape. So it's an entirely different experience of time. And my take from this idea of the nature of time is that maybe we're all just actually living in a dream, and everything is a dream, because the nature of time obeys the laws of dreaming perhaps more than it obeys the laws of ordinary waking consciousness.
Yeah, I love that idea.
So I think we should all go away and make sure we do our dream journaling this evening and compare notes in the morning, perhaps. Does anyone else have any other questions for Eric?
Yeah. So are we living in a dream, Eric? Like, honestly, I quite like to just bring up, you know, if we're wrapping up, some ontological questions here. If, I mean, Sarah's comment, like, do these observations that we're seeing with the dynamics of dreaming, like what import does that have on the nature of this reality, and and the dreamlike, possible dreamlike nature of it? And yeah, so there's the ontological question of what you think about that, given all of your research, but also the ontological shock factor I'm kind of interested in terms of what you feel about that. Like, we're all talking quite, you know, just casually and intellectually about this stuff, like, oh yeah, you know, your past is done, so is your future. Your future's also set, you know, implications, no free will, you know, what it's quite an intense implication. So you know, some people, if they have these very intense precognitive dreams, it can be like exceptionally viscerally like impactful for them in terms of their whole worldview. So yeah, two things I guess.
Well, let me address the second one, the ontological shock, and the idea of like, what does it say about free will and so on. And it's like that's a huge topic that I talk about in my books, and I can only gloss it here. I mean, I think that what it proves. I mean, I think of dreams as a cosmological tool, honestly, because what it essentially affirms is what's often called the block universe. That is to say that we live in a four-dimensional space-time, and that time is a dimension like space, which means the future already exists. And and this idea is not really seriously doubted by most physicists. It's since the time of Einstein, this has been pretty much taken for granted, and I agree with it. And that this is what dreams show us. So, but what does it say about free will? I mean, everyone asks this question when you start talking about precognitive dreams and so on. It's complicated, and we can experience free will. We can freely, our actions are free in one sense, but in the sense that my freely willed actions at this moment are in the past from another observer, means that there's that set in stone quality. So you have to deal with these irreconcilable opposing ways of seeing things. But I'll say,
like relative free will.
What was that?
It's like relative free will. It's an interesting way of.
Well, it's just it passeth understanding. I mean, we don't have the cognitive ability to like reconcile this. But I'll say that my practice and my orientation is Zen. Okay, and I take the block universe that is revealed by precognitive dreams as a koan. Okay, because when you push into these questions about causation and time loops and the block universe, it acts as a koan. I mean, you will have an enlightenment experience. Believe me, I've had little kenshos, pushing this, and one of the themes that comes through in the Satori experiences of some Zen masters is a realization of the truth of the block universe, essentially, what we would call the block universe. It's kind of this kind of Parmenides idea of eternalism. And that's a theme that comes through again and again. And for us Westerners, we think that no free will is like this horrible thing. But in fact, in these experiences, it's blissful. It's a blissful realization. So I try to sell people on the idea of like, just set your idea of free will aside. You don't have to throw it away, but just set it aside and just really like sit with reality, without this kind of baggage of free will. Because if you're a Zen master or like a race car driver or a martial artist, the last thing you want is this burden of free will and thinking about free will. You want to act in the moment and automatically, and that it's those flow experiences are really the best experiences of life, and then coupled with these enlightenment experiences that really have this kind of an eternalism quality. I'm not troubled at all by the no free will thing, honestly, and I just try to sell people on that potential. There's a potential there for seeing this as a really blissful way of viewing the world.
Wow, fantastic! Thank you so much.
I can relate to that. I love the idea of thinking I'm living in a dream. It makes everything seem much more magical and fluid. And I think someone said to me the other day, like, that there's this experience that they have, and they call it glimmers, where it's like this insight or this sudden intuitive understanding that maybe they're living in a dream, and it's an exciting feeling. And because I'm so into dreaming, I mean, this is another thing as well. these sorts of things can drive people mad, because if you think everything is a synchronicity and everything is a dream sign, then it can kind of drive you insane. And with lucid dreaming, you know, very often in lucid dreams, I have this experience of almost feeling this tsunami of memories overwhelming me, because you're kind of remembering so much. Because one of the things I'm really interested, we've spoken about this relationship and this different understanding of memory that, especially in ancient Greek, was very well articulated. This idea that remembering isn't just about remembering past events, but about remembering your divine source and your connection with everything else in the universe. So I think that it's in lucid dreaming, it could be really overwhelming just how much information you seem to have access to. And if perhaps we were trying to operate in an ordinary waking world where we're trying to comprehend that amount of information, would go mad. So we have to be selective and grounded still when we're considering the fact that we might all be living in a dream. I mean, I have nice little dream epiphanies sometimes when I'm waking up. And I had a really nice dream epiphany the other day where I thought to myself, about how, what if your entire life is a dream, and every kind of day you peel back a layer of dreaming to get closer and closer to the ultimate reality, which is what you experience once you die. And it was a very satisfying epiphany that I had. And I do think, you know, when you look back on your life in your sort of teenage or 20s, you're like, it does feel like you weren't fully awake. It feels like life is a process of waking up to something. So I hope so.
I like that, you know, what you mentioned, that, like, you know, if we were going through waking life with the, you know, this kind of like enlarged awareness, we would never be able to function. And, like, you know, Aldous Huxley talked about a reducing valve. That's like kind of the model I use. That in our waking life, we kind of have a reducing valve that keeps us, you know, from, you know, not being responding to everything in our future. You can't do that at a given moment. You have to, you know, to have a coherently functioning body, you have to be responding to what's immediately present, rather than, you know, responding to you know, your entire life. So
reminds me of the Dr. Seuss story, Horton Hears a Who. I always thought that was a good example to sort of teach children this idea of how time and place is, or your experience of the world is attenuated by time and place, because Horton is able to communicate with this world that exists on a speck of dust on a flower, because he's got incredibly sensitive hearing, being an elephant or whatever it is that he is. And the people living on the speck of dust in the flower have no awareness of the entire universe that exists beyond them. So
it's also why a lot of people wake up from lucid dreaming, because you can't handle it.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, you know, so many people they get too excited during lucid dreams because it's just too much information, too much sensory overload. So you wake up out of it. Emma, would you like to ask?
Yeah, it was just the question I put in the chat. Maybe I missed this, and Mary touched upon it, but I don't understand why your future self would want to message you about more mundane things. So sort of some of the more dramatic events are quite obvious. Do you think it's kind of just like what Sarah was talking about, where it's like just letting you in, essentially, letting you know, hey, you know, things are not as they being perceived?
You can look at it that way. I tend to think of it that we're probably, like, again, I think that this is probably a natural function of, you know, our cognition that we're just ordinarily unaware of, and that we are essentially being given previews of everything that's
right.
going to happen to us. And so, you know, if you're, you know, if you, you know, for instance, you know, if you record your dreams, you're only going to be recording like 1 or 2 out of however many you had in the course of a night. And then, you know, it's going to match something in the future, but it may not be the most remarkable thing. I think that we are sort of pre-metabolizing our all of our future experience. I suspect this. There's no way to prove that, and there's no way to falsify that hypothesis. But yeah, I think that we're kind of pre-metabolizing all of our future experience, and And so when you record a precognitive dream, chances are it's going to be about something, not earth-shattering. That's the way I look at it. But
yeah,
there are other ways.
Earth-shattering ones might just stand out more to you anyway, right?
You're going to naturally notice the earth-shattering ones. So that's the ones that make it into the ESP literature. As
exactly. Or your dream journal.
That's what links your emotions, isn't it? When I was a teenager, I used to have dreams sometimes that I was having sex with my dad, and I'd always be like, "Don't remember that one. Don't remember that one." And then that is your question.
Yeah. First of all, I must apologize, Eric and Sarah, because I got to this meeting very late because I had another event. But I just wanted to make a quick comment in reaction to what Sarah said about, whether life is a dream. And I find, I don't know if other people have this experience, but I quite often die in dreams. And but when I die in dreams, I always wake up. And so as a result of that, I have this conviction that when I do die, I will again just wake up because it's a dream. Except my impression is that it's not just a question of the world being a dream, that really one's dealing with a hierarchy of dreams, that it's dreams within dreams within dreams. And so I'm really just elaborating on Sarah's idea. And another point, someone was talking about precognitions of death and how these shouldn't be taken literally. But so I thought I might just mention one example I had where this was a long time ago, about 10 years ago. A friend of mine called Sasha had a son, and in the dream, the son drowned. And I remember when the news was broken to Sasha, how distraught he was. And this was such a powerful dream that I woke up and I didn't know what to do because I thought this must be a precognitive dream. Do I tell the person? Well, I didn't. However, a week later, another friend of mine called Sasha told me that his son had died in a drowning. So it was an interesting displacement in which it seemed to be a precognitive dream, but I got the wrong Sasha.
Yeah. Well, that's basic to dreaming. I didn't mention it along with like puns and associations, but dreams will substitute if like they will take another thing in the same series and substitute. They will symbolize one thing by another thing that's in the same set or series in your mental associations. So so that's a beautiful example of that, yeah. Well,
also I sometimes precognize my own death, and I'm never quite sure whether it's a precognition or whether it's just my morbid imagination. And so what you're saying, Eric, is gratifying, that I shouldn't interpret it necessarily as my actual death.
Someone else with your same name or something.
Eric, can I just ask, will there be a video of this as a Zoom meeting, which I can watch later?
Yes, there will be, Bernard.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. So I can watch it later. If you could send me the link, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Any other questions from anyone? I'll just make sure I've not missed anything. Might have missed anything. Well, I thoroughly enjoyed that, Eric. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to everyone for coming as well. And I think that this talk will probably give us precognitive dreams. Like you say, these things act. This is why I think it is good to watch sci-fi movies, because they do tend to get into your unconscious and make you think about these kinds of stuff. And any film that's about dreams or is life a dream tends to have quite a powerful effect on me, I find. I really like watching Holy Mountain before I go to sleep. I always find that gives you really vivid dreams.
Interesting. Yeah.
And Vanilla Sky, that's my favorite lucid dream film.
Well, thank you, everyone. This was a delight.
It was really great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.